Are you suffering from a collection of funny symptoms in your hip and you're wondering whether or not you have a labral tear? Well, if that's you, then this video has the answers. My name is Will Harlow and I'm the Over-Fifties specialist physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And today we're going to be talking about the signs and symptoms of a hip labral tear. Now, before we dive into the video, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel because it really helps me reach more people and you'll be the first to know when new videos are released. But let's talk about a hip labral tear, who it can happen to, what it feels like, and then the 5 signs and symptoms I would look for when trying to assess what's going on. So, a hip labral tear. So a hip labral tear is a common injury that occurs just around the hip joint. So to give you an idea of what's going on, I have my hip joint model here. So this big bone here is part of your pelvis. Okay, so this is the bone that you can feel at the front of your pelvis, and then you've got the pelvic rim that goes around your back. And then that has a socket on it, which is shaped like a cup. And then the femur, which is your thigh bone, that has a ball on it and that fits into the socket. So they fit together like that. And you can see the ligaments that surround the joint here. We have some really tough, strong ligaments around it. But underneath there, I'm not sure if you can see in the video, but we have the ball and socket joint. And then this is obviously your thigh bone. It's been cut off in the model here, but this would go all the way down to the knee. Now the hip is actually a very strong and stable joint. It's got all of these tough ligaments around it, so it's a little bit less mobile than the shoulder, but it also moves in lots of different directions. So the way the hip moves is we have the ball and socket together, and the ball can spin inside the socket. So it can go forward and back, out to the side, and then across your body, and it can also rotate, okay? Now, because the hip needs to move in lots of different directions and the socket on the pelvis is not that deep, we need something that makes the socket deeper, okay? So if this is your socket, if we just had the hip in here like this, it would start to fall out. So the thing that makes the socket deeper is a layer of cartilage that sits all the way around the joint. Okay, you can't see it here, but it sits around here, and we call this the labrum. Okay, so all of us have one, and it's like a tough layer of fibrocartilage. It's a ring, and it makes the socket deeper, so it helps the hip to fit together. Now, unfortunately, because the labrum is a soft tissue structure and not a bone, it's prone to getting strains and little nicks in the cartilage, which can cause it to tear. And when we say a labral tear, that's what we're talking about happening. So somewhere around that rim of cartilage, we've got a flap or a tear, or part of it has broken off. Now, lots of people have these tears and don't even know about it. So it's possible you have a labral tear and have no pain at all. And if that's the case, we would never do anything about it. We'd just leave it as it is. But some people start to develop symptoms, okay? And the symptoms they develop, we're going to talk about in a minute. And the first thing to say is that a hip labral tear is usually more common in women. And the reason it's more common in women is because you have slightly wider shaped pelvises than us men. So it changes the angles of the force around the hip, and then that can make labral tears more likely. Now, labral tears can sometimes look like arthritis when we first assess them. So some of the signs and symptoms are pretty similar. Now, the difference between labral tears is that they can often happen in people who are much younger. So I've seen girls in their 20s and 30s who have hip labral tears, and someone somewhere has told them that it sounds like they have arthritis. And they don't have arthritis, it's just that the symptoms seem similar, but in fact they have a tear to the labrum, and they're treated very differently. So let's talk about the signs and symptoms of a labral tear. We'll talk about the 5 most common things I would look for and how to differentiate them from other problems. Now, the first sign that labral tears often cause is pain in the groin. Now, when we're talking about pain in the groin, I'll stand up to show you. The pain is usually about here. So if you put your straight hand across the line of your pelvis, and this is where you feel your pain, that can sometimes be the sign of a labral tear. Now, where this can get confusing is that's very similar to how pain usually appears for arthritis. So we need to look at the other symptoms as well. So pain in the groin is the first sign. The second sign of a hip labral tear can be the hip giving way. Okay, and this can happen because the labrum gets trapped between the two bones. It can cause sudden pain, and then this can cause the muscles around the hip to give out so that the hip feels like it's giving way. Now, the third sign of a labral tear is clicking in the hip, and it can feel like you move it really nicely and then suddenly you'll get a big click or a big pop. That can be a common sign, and the reason that's happening is because, again, the layer of cartilage is just getting trapped between the two bones, and as it becomes unstuck, you get a click, okay? And it can feel like something is clunked or something has moved inside the joint. Again, that's a very common sign. Now, obviously, if that thing doesn't become unstuck from within the joint, that's when pain gets worse and worse and worse. So a hip labral tear can cause quite significant pain, and it's when the labrum doesn't become unstuck. Now, the fourth sign from a hip labral tear is catching in the hip on certain movements. And this is where it starts to differ from arthritis. Now, in arthritis, what we tend to find is your range of motion in your hip will just slowly decrease. So it becomes stiffer and stiffer over time. Whereas in a labral tear, you might still have a full range of motion, but every now and again, it feels like something jams and you can't move it. You have to wiggle it around and then it becomes free again. And again, that is a symptom of the flap of cartilage becoming caught between the two bones. You can't move anything because the body says not safe to move. You have to wait for that flap to come out of the joint again, and then you can start to move. So that's how it can feel very different to arthritis. And then the final symptom, which can be a confusing symptom for many people of a hip labral tear, is a dull ache that starts to radiate all the way down the leg. And this is quite common. It can sometimes go all the way to the ankle for people, which can sometimes give it the appearance of sciatica or other nerve problems. Now, with sciatica, we usually find that the pain is shooting, so it shoots down the leg. Whereas with a labral tear, the pain is usually like a dull ache that slowly spreads. So we look at the characteristics of the pain when we're trying to decide whether it's a labral tear or sciatica or arthritis. Now, arthritis can sometimes radiate down the leg. It tends not to go down as far, and it tends to be more of a specific pain, whereas a labral tear can be more diffuse and widespread. So that's another symptom we would look for. So those are the 5 signs and symptoms of a hip labral tear. I would say the key one there is the catching and the clicking. That tends to be quite different to how it clicks and pops or catches in arthritis. If you're moving it, it's got a nice range of motion, but suddenly it will get stuck and it will catch. Chances are it's probably a labral tear. But again, as with all of my videos, it's best to get personalised one-on-one advice if you think this sounds like you. Anyway, that's all we've got for today. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to get more health tips from me, then you can pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50, and it'll give you loads more tips and strategies for restoring and keeping your health in your 50s and beyond. You can grab it on Amazon using the link below this video. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you watching, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next one.